All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the fifth and final installment of our RTI in Action virtual series. It has been a truly exciting past few weeks, and I can't believe we're already at the end. We have an absolutely all-star panel of guest speakers today that will be joining us to share their experiences as we go through and ask some of the important questions about each of the topics we've covered over the past 5 weeks. So these are a mix of commonly asked questions from our own partners, from past Q&A sessions, and just general practice questions about RTI. And as always, if you have any questions for Classworks folks or for our wonderful speakers, please drop them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of today's presentation. All registrants will receive a copy of today's recording along with a copy of those Q&A questions, and you can access all of our RTI in Action recordings on our website and also by subscribing to our YouTube page. So definitely check that out at the end of today's session. So just to recap what we've already covered over the past weeks, we talked about screening and progress monitoring, effective interventions, data and decision-making, and of course, SEL and RTI sustainability. And as we mentioned, today's session will be a callback to those previous episodes with topics focused around each of the RTI components you see listed here, as well as our panelists' own experiences rolling them out in their own districts. So without further ado, let's meet our panel. First, we have Carrie Wedding from Owensboro Public Schools in Kentucky, where she works as the district's Assistant Director for Special Education. Happy to have you here, Carrie. Cannot wait to hear your thoughts. We're very excited to welcome Joan Whitehead, the Executive Director of S-Stage Georgia. Joan is a wealth of knowledge in RTI and MTSS practices, and we are very happy to have her here as well. Joining us from Alabama's Bruton City Schools, we have Mr. Barry Wood. Barry is a phenomenal educator and brings a fantastic perspective from site level leadership. And from Lowndes County here in Georgia, we're joined by Buffy Reddick, the Testing, PBIS, and RTI coordinator for the system. She is an RTI All-Star, and we are very excited to hear her thoughts as well. So thank you all so much for joining us today. As school and district leaders, your expertise is highly, highly valued, and I know our audience is very excited to hear what you've all got to say. So while they're waited on bated breath, let's move on to screening. So as you all know, the first step to an RTI MTSS process is getting a pulse on where your students' base levels are so that you can help chart their path back to grade level proficiency. So Buffy, as your district's testing coordinator, I'd love to get your take on this first. What do you think is the most important thing to look for when selecting a screener for your schools?
Good afternoon, Michael. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. Well, just like Michael just said, when you think about those essential components of RTI, of MTSS, that universal screener is so crucial, that critical first step in identifying students at risk. So as I reflected on that question, the one thing that kept popping in my mind over and over, reliability. Reliability. If your screener is not reliable, you're wasting your time. And so as I started thinking about reliability and what that really means, you know, when you research screeners, there are actually elements of effective universal screeners. And two of those immediately go back to reliability. That's the sensitivity of that screener, and that's the specificity of that screener. And both of those elements are key in making sure that that screener is reliable and do the job that it was intended to do. In addition to those two elements, you want that screener to be practical, you want it to be brief, you want it to be simple, and you also want it to be equitable. So reliability would be, to me, the most important part of a universal screener.
That's really important. That's a great take. And Barry, I'm curious from your perspective, is there any logistical advice that you would have about administering a screener within a school building itself?
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to be here today too. I would say just be very deliberate in your timing in conjunction with other progress monitorings and other things that you have going on. Establish those on your calendar and stick to them. Make sure that they're that it's viewed as important to everyone on your staff. I'd say factor in those screening times as part of your digital learning plan. Often, you know, we allocate so much time to our digital learning, and we don't realize often how much time a screener takes up of that. It is so important to get good data So you can't skip that step, but you need to allocate that when you're looking at how much. So finding one, like Buffy said, that's reliable, but is also can be administered in a succinct amount of time, so that you're not taken away from other learning platforms. And I would say consider employing additional personnel to make sure that those screenings happen when they need to happen, and that you're gathering that data in an appropriate time. Whether you use volunteers, maybe you're interventionist, or bringing in substitutes, whatever you have to do. The beginning of a school year, and some of those times when we need to do those screenings, it often happens when there's so much going on. So just taking an all hands on deck approach to making sure that you're getting good data, and you're setting your children up for a success from the beginning with these platforms.
Fantastic take. Carrie, is there anything you'd like to weigh in on as far as how screening might be different for special education students?
The screening itself is not different for special education students. It just kind of gives us another layer of data to say, are we heading in the right direction for kids? And then are we putting things in place to make sure kids grow? So as far as special ed itself, the screener would not be any different.
Gotcha. Joan, do you have any thoughts you might want to add in on this before we move to the next topic?
I just believe that selecting that screener that's going to identify those specific areas that's going to help us to get our students to that level of performance that we want them to be by the end of the year, that has different tools and mechanisms in place to guide the way, the small steps, the stepping stones from baseline data to the eventual outcome data that you really want. Tools that have those built-in steps to help us get our students to where they need to be is most important.
Definitely, absolutely agree. And Judy, anything you might want to add right before we hop over?
I just wanted to chime in with Barry a little bit about the consistency, because I feel like from what I see, with districts that I work with, is that they're really great at the beginning of the year and end of the year, and often I see Joan nodding, the middle of the year. And that's really where you can catch a lot of kids that are struggling with on-grade level curriculum. And those are the kids we're trying to not let fall through those cracks and not let them just be a tier student for the next year. So make sure that you are doing it, with fidelity. I know everybody's tired of hearing with fidelity, but it's so important to do it all 3 times, really, to make sure that number one, everyone's growing, and then number 2, that you're catching those kids in the middle of the year.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, let's move on to our next topic, progress monitoring. So as we know, progress monitoring is a critical piece of the RTI process, with the goal being to understand if the student is responding to their interventions, typically not utilized for every student, but for specific groups, tiers, and especially common for students in special education. So that being said, Carrie, I'm throwing this one out to you as our expert. Can you talk a little bit about what progress monitoring looks like in your district, and more specifically, how your data teams use that progress monitoring data to make informed decisions for students?
Absolutely. Progress monitoring is crucial to the work that we do in special education, because it truly tells us, is the specially designed instruction that we are providing moving kids, or is it not moving kids, and what do we need to adjust? And we are required every 10 days to progress monitor. And what we love about ClassWorks is we are now progress monitoring every single week, to where we are getting real-time data on kids so that we can make instructional decisions. What we really never want to happen is that progress monitoring is just a thing that we have to do. And what ClassWorks has allowed us to do is kind of shift our mindset from it's a thing we have to do to it is the thing that's connected to the instructional integrity that we are providing for kids, so that we can close gaps.
So important that it's like not just an extra thing that teachers have on their plate, but really just kind of fits into that holistic approach to RTI and TSS. So Joan, do you have any suggestions for schools who are new or maybe looking to improve progress monitoring, how they can implement with fidelity?
I agree with Carrie about the importance of the progress monitoring piece. And I know that schools oftentimes will have a bank of intervention tools that they're using. And many times the intervention tool, and specifically ClassWorks, has those progress monitoring components built in. It is, I think, is very important when it is built in. And although Carrie mentioned that it is a most important piece in the special ed world, it's also an important piece in the general ed world, because if teachers are actually using data to drive their instruction, they have to monitor progress all along the way in order to fully meet the needs of all the students they serve. And in the MTSS world, where we are providing the multi tiers of support for students, we have to have those tools. And it's great to have as Carrie was said, they are mandated to progress monitor every couple of weeks, but to have different times in your instructional framework that you're progress monitoring, that you're monitoring the progress of the students to make sure that the students are growing to that level of performance that your goal is for them for the end of the year.
Right, absolutely. Judy, do you have anything you might want to chime in with here?
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of go back to logistics a little bit, because we talk about planning the time, and we think about that maybe progress monitoring, you've got your intervention time set up, progress monitoring might take up the whole time, and we've run into different partners where they ran into problems with that, and the kids either didn't have time for their intervention that they needed, or they didn't have time to do the assessing for the probes and things like that. So even at ClassWorks, we're saying, dedicate, I know we're going to talk about intervention time in just a second, but dedicate time that isn't just about that, because we see such inconsistent progress monitoring just being administered. And if you set aside that time specifically, you're going to make time for students to be able to do the probes, to do their interventions, to have teacher conferences, to do just the whole package, because you really do want to address the entire idea of academic intervention, which even includes goal setting, right? And things like that. So just important to plan for the whole thing.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our next topic, Barry, Buffy, is there anything that either of you would like to add?
I'll just reiterate what was said earlier about the ClassWorks and that frequent progress monitoring, how seamless it can be, and how it does have to be all consuming. But you are able to capture that data in a timely manner, meet the requirements from your states, in that 10-day, that 2-week period as well, and get some good data along the way. So that is a strong component.
And Michael, I was just going to piggyback what Carrie said, that those two words, instructional integrity. How powerful is that? Instructional integrity. And that's one of the things that we're so excited about with ClassWorks, is that integrity is there. That opportunity for consistency is there, because those weekly probes are going to be assigned in that consistent manner every week. Now, the teachers will have that flexibility if they want to go in and really drill down to a specific domain for those kids, if they want to change that up during the course of the week. But the instructional integrity is there, as well as that opportunity for that consistency, which is key.
Absolutely. Instructional integrity, definitely a powerful phrase. So if that's it on here, we'll move on to the meat of the RTI process, interventions. So as we covered in our last session, building sustainable frameworks for student interventions is just as important as having the right tools in place. Some districts utilize pull-out classrooms for intervention students. Others bake intervention periods right into the bell schedule. So Barry, I want your opinion as a site leader. How did you go about building a framework with intervention in mind, and how do you figure out what's right for your school?
Well, and it's a tough thing, because obviously with tier 1 is where it's at. You can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem. So we want to get to that world where we don't have intervention, but we're not there yet. So since we're not there yet, like most schools, we do have a dedicated tier 2 and tier 3 times. But tier 2 and center time within our dedicated instructional blocks, We made sure that those are built into our schedule. Those are very rigid. Ensuring that every classroom has the adequate technology was, I think, the key component over the past several years to making sure that when we're within that tier 2 time, when we're within that instructional block, that we move to tier 2, that we're engaging every student. That's where classwork is so beneficial, because we were able to continue to differentiate within that time. We could pull those tier 2 students could come back to the desk, while the remainder of the students could do some differentiation right there on their own within the classroom. And that was that small group intervention, that small group face to face with a great teacher. There's no replacement for that. Technology can't replace that. So, but it can allow us to make that happen, and then have a meaningful digital learning for all your students. One of the things we did do a little differently than I think some schools do, and maybe your schools do it as well, if not, I would encourage them. We have the use of paraprofessionals to use computer labs. Now, I know computer labs, in most cases, those things are kind of a thing of, not really somewhat of a thing of the past. But in doing that, and when I came to this school, I was unsure about that, but we kind of built on it, in that we take and every day our students have a 30-minute block of dedicated digital learning time. Within that, our students, while that's happening, our teachers have a dedicated tier 3 time. So that keeps a small group in the classroom. It reduces a lot of that, just that noise and distractions that happen, so that we can really work with our struggling learners in a quiet environment, and at the same time, again, using ClassWorks and differentiating again in that classroom. So we get that the amount of time that we feel is necessary for our students within the ClassWorks program or other learning programs to move our students and grow every child at the speed at which they can. So that's been the biggest gain for us, I think, when it comes to intervention and building that schedule, just utilizing all the resources that are available to make it happen.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would completely agree. I think we all learned over the past year and a half that you can't replace face-to-face, but there is definitely power in having a digital tool that can help facilitate interventions in a face-to-face way. Judy, do you have anything you might want to add to this?
I definitely want to say ditto for a lot of everything that's been said, logistics, like that, and really just taking it, we do still work with partners that, where you'll see where teachers have to come up with the time on their own. And that's, just really promotes a lot of anxiety on their side, and really having that schedule, like that 30 minutes and all of these logistics, everything worked out, just takes that out of the equation. And so just, definitely that's the way to go for sure.
And Joan, I'm curious, I know you've had a lot of experience. You've seen, it coming from a master schedule, you've seen teachers doing their own thing, finding the time to build in interventions. What's your take? Where do you feel is the right balance?
I'm thinking about the tier 1 instruction, and typically in the tier 1 instruction, all of those components, especially about the differentiation piece, comes into place. However, when there are students who need the support at tiers 2 and 3, if that time is not on a schedule, it is not sure to happen. But if it is scheduled, and I like what Barry was saying about how they're using the old computer lab concept to allow the teachers in his building to have that quiet time with that small group of students uninterrupted to provide intervention and to do the progress monitoring to make sure that students are getting to that level of performance that we want them to be by the end of the year, to keep them on track.
Definitely.
And ClassWorks is an excellent way to do that.
Definitely.
An excellent tool to use during that digital time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Buffy, is there anything you'd like to add in on this?
I think they said it perfectly. It's like what Judy said. I'd say ditto to everything that's been said.
Excellent. And Carrie, anything from you before we hop over to data?
Just really quickly, we're very blessed. We're a one-on-one technology district, but not all of our schools, like Barry, have dedicated RTI time. So what we really encouraged our special ed people last year to do is find time within. So, because we're going to live in the learning path. That's what we were saying. You live in that learning path for special education. And so what can be traded out? So if you're doing a bell ringer, could you do classworks instead of that bell ringer? So just kind of thinking differently about that.
Great point. Great point. So our next topic, data and decision making. Ideally, your RTI and MTSS process is data driven. It tells us what's working, what's not working. It helps guide our next steps. And the goal of any data team is to create that consistent and comprehensive framework for improvement planning that translates from district to school to classroom to individual students. So with that in mind, Buffy, I'm coming to you for this one. How regularly does your data team meet, and what are some key points that you guys look for?
When you think about our system in Lowndes County and Valdosta, Georgia, we have 10,000 plus students. We have 7 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 1 high school. So we have a very large student population. Our teachers, of course, they're working with some type of data every day. But as our data teams, especially our grade level data teams, we meet each week. And so that's one of the things that we really, really love about ClassWorks is that real-time actionable data to where our teachers can be in that platform, can be in those reports, and they can really track that student progress and that growth. Not only that, they can have the students in turn track their own growth, which is awesome. So absolutely, we meet each week. And usually there's a different content that we look at each week. We meet by grade level. We even do some vertical data team meetings along the way during the year. So we've always said, and you know it just as well as I do, data is only as good as what you do with it.
For sure, that is definitely a key phrase right there. It has to be actionable for it to be useful. So Carrie, I know you guys are newer to ClassWorks. How are you anticipating ClassWorks will help make your data more consistent and actionable as you guys continue to use it?
Yeah, well, last year obviously was our first year, and it was also, as everyone knows, the COVID year. So, but it was also a great year to learn ClassWorks because we had to learn ClassWorks. So by the end of the year last year, we found some key reports that worked for us that kind of analyzed the skills breakdown. And then we were able to go look at those reports specifically with teachers and say, okay, hey, look at these kids. They all have this deficit. Like we learned real quick that in middle school, if you're in a special ed resource room, you don't have any number sense. And we were able to learn that quickly through ClassWorks. So now that teacher can go back and say, okay, guys, we're going to work on number sense because if we don't have that, we can't build any further. So that was one thing we do. And then we also just shared those reports, and we met monthly, I think monthly at this point, with our special ed people saying, hey, let's look at this. What's our usage look like? What are our kids growing? And then, you guys have embedded some great reports into ClassWorks that also allow us not just to see the skill itself, but to be able to show a teacher that kids are growing, but maybe it's not on the progress monitoring yet, because you can see in levels, did they go from a 2nd grade level to a 4th grade level in these 2 weeks, but that may not be reflected on that progress monitoring yet. So we're able to use those reports to ensure teachers you are doing the right thing. So to keep doing that.
Gotcha. And Barry, do you use any of this data for your SST meetings at your school?
Oh yeah, yes. Of course, data drives everything, and it's very easy as an educator to get passionate about learning and to be passionate about your kids. We love our children. It's a little harder to be passionate about data. So we've really learned just to become very intentional with it. Having clear expectations about what kind of growth we want, what kind of expectations we want, what our benchmarks for our learners want to be. Within ClassWorks, the clear data, excuse me, I believe they're cutting grass outside. So the clear data charts and graph, those just allow us to spend less time within our data meetings and within our meetings, talking about data collection, and the discussion becomes more on the strategies and solutions. Some of the benefits from ClassWorks have been that not only with my struggling learners, I think, and that's what I loved about the data, the reports that we could pull from ClassWorks, that I used them as often with my gifted meetings as I did with my struggling learners, and to be able to explain that and to demonstrate that growth to some of our for some of our more challenging students. The challenging students being those far above grade level. It was just a very powerful piece.
Gotcha. And so our next topic that we're moving to is social and emotional learning. So we know that that's critical for any successful RTI process. And when talking about effectively incorporating SEL elements, we're really talking about core competencies and self-awareness, self-management, and specifically goal setting. This is pretty new for a lot of people, and it's been the subject of a lot of conversations as we head into the new school year. And the SMART framework is probably the most well-known. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely goals. I want to pitch this one to Joan. Are you guys using SMART goals as a part of student SEL initiatives? And is this something you think is relevant?
SMART goals, I think, are wonderful. I've had several conversations this week with folks about the whole social emotional learning piece and the whole importance of maintaining that student connectedness and well-being in our schools, especially in light of this past year, the past 18 months, or however many months it's been with COVID-19. But the SMART goals, and as Carrie mentioned, with being specific with those eighth graders that didn't have the number sense, when you are able to identify the specific areas of need that a student may have in their social emotional learning department, it is important to identify the goals and the objectives and work on those little steps, those stepping stones to get the students to where they need to be. And I think that whole SMART concept that has been incorporated into the ClassWorks platform is going to become an excellent resource for folks to use down the road. I'm excited about that.
I completely agree. And Barry, I want to hop back to you for a second. In your school, are you guys using one specific tool for SEL? What does that look like right now?
Well, that's something that we did that like you said, it's a hot topic right now. We use a variety of different things within our school. We've actually employed some personnel. That's one of the biggest things within our system is establish the personnel for that social emotional learning, trying to catch those gaps. The COVID year's been hard on us all, and we're just relying on the personnel in with these programs and just good teaching.
Great. That's definitely an effective way is to have personnel dedicated to SEL. So before we wrap up, Judy, do you have anything else you might want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, again, it's a hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. And that's why, ClassWorks was like, we've been doing academic intervention for a really long time, for many years. But what do teachers need to make this really come alive for students? And so you've got to build in the goal setting and all of that. We know teachers were doing it. We've had professional learning sessions where teachers showed up with long, taped together file folders for every student, right? That, and had all them tracking their data. Well, this is just going to take that to a whole nother level for them, right? And a lot of us adults have been doing SMART goals for a long time. And this is going to let it really flip over and be on the student side. I think they're going to get into it. And there is a lot of research out there that says that students who set these little goals and have these achievements and they're learning the same content as their peers, they are going to achieve more. And that is ultimately what we want, right, for everyone. So we're super excited to really be able to say, here are the tools that teachers need, right, to be able to track a lot of these SEL initiatives that everyone's trying to put into place.
Absolutely. And we are right at time, guys. So I want to be respectful of your time. So that concludes today's session and is the very end of our 5-part live series. So thank you all, each of you, Carrie, Barry, Joan, and Buffy, and Judy. You guys have been fantastic. So we've got just a couple of questions that have come in. But if you guys have other obligations, please don't feel like you need to stay on. But we had a question come in that I think is a really good one that I wanted to ask, and that's how do we build buy-in for teachers? Does anyone want to field this one?
Well, that's a tough one. That is That is really, really tough, especially I would say right now it's probably harder than it has been with all of the money coming into education from a variety of sources. How do you build in that? Because there seems like there's so many programs that come at you. So I think that's where that focus comes in from administration and from leadership, to be there, to provide the adequate professional development, to provide the adequate, to respect the teacher's time, to make sure that you're bringing in substitutes or providing those professional development days, so that it's important. If you dedicate that, you'll get that buy-in. And again, it goes back to the data. Data drives everything. If you can show the need, you can show the progress, and you can report that progress in a very public manner, you're going to get that buy-in. Our superintendent does a great job in promoting some of the objectives that we have. It was nice for him to bring our progress monitoring data into the district-wide meeting to welcome the teachers back, to show what our teachers had done. So we've got buy-in. So that helps. That really helps. So just getting everybody on board, promoting those successes. That's what I would encourage.
Absolutely. And then we have another really good question that I just want to quickly add to this list too. If you had, what's at the top of your list for recommendations when it comes to creating a sustainable RTI plan? Anybody want to chime in on this? Buffy, I think you might be a good one for this one.
Well, I will tell you, we have looked for several years for a consistent program that would go above and beyond what our RTI students were receiving in Tier 1. And what we were looking for was a program that would universally screen, a program that had that built-in individualized learning plan, that ILP, the actual intervention, that would also assign those weekly probes with progress monitor, that we could have that data and we could study that data and have those wonderful actionable data reports for our teachers to utilize. And we could find pieces of that everywhere. But ClassWorks is the program that has it all, that one-stop shop. And so we are so excited that we've been able to become partners with ClassWorks and become part of the ClassWorks family, because we're planning on moving some big mountains this year, even in the face of the pandemic. And so absolutely, you've got to have all those components. They've got to all work together. It's just like all those different pieces of a jigsaw puzzle coming in. We felt like we were doing a really good job in parts with different components, but we just were having trouble making all the pieces fit together. So we have large plans this year, and we're really excited for the great things to come.
And we are excited to help you get there, Buffy, I have got to say. So again, thank you to all of our amazing panelists. You guys have been a wealth of information. If you are an audience member and you would like to learn more about ClassWorks, you're not yet part of the ClassWorks fam, start a conversation with us at classworks.com. We'd be happy to talk you through what's going on with RTI in your neck of the woods. But thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. All registrants will receive a recording of today's session, as well as a copy of the Q&A. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.